Hey everyone, Ben Newton from Macro Connect here with a quick tutorial video explaining the coding commands that are introduced in lesson number 3 of the Code to Compose student-facing curriculum. So again, at this point, your students should have completed lesson 1 and lesson number 2 in the Code to Compose workbook. Then they'll be fully equipped to handle everything that's covered in this lesson. So we're going to keep it short and sweet here just to get to the bare bones of what this lesson entails. And it's basically two commands. One is called sample, one is called rate. So sample, for those of you who are familiar with 20th century music, especially in the latter half, something that was popularized by hip hop, essentially, but it's used in all sorts of electronic music genres. And all it means is taking a piece of one existing sound file. It could be an existing song, it could be just a generic audio effect. It doesn't matter. It's just a piece of audio, and then reusing it and repackaging it into something new. So in Sonic Pi, there is a preloaded library of samples that are available for you and your students to use. And there's also a way for you to upload custom samples that we're not going to get into in this video, but it's more of an advanced topic if you're interested in that down the line. But basically, after students learn how to trigger notes using play, a lot of them are looking for something deeper, something more, different sounds, different ways to get their ideas into code. That's where samples come in. So there are samples in Sonic Pi that are for a lot of different purposes. There's individual drum sounds, there's individual guitar sounds, all the way to loops that are, anywhere from 3 to 15-second samples that are just already kind of ready to plug and play and go from there. So why don't I just show you how this works instead of talking about it? First, with how you type out a sample. So you may have guessed it. In order to trigger a sample, you just write the word sample, and then just like with the use synth command in lesson 2, a menu will appear. Now, these are all of the samples that by default are going to be loaded on your instance of Sonic Pi that you've downloaded. A lot of these have a prefix. You can see elec would be like just electric sound. Git, you can guess, would mean guitars. A loop is, again, one of those more song-based, several second long samples. I'll show you some examples in a second. But basically, you can the book does a good job of introducing the concept of prefixes to your students. However, you can reinforce that and just say, hey, like if you're looking for a specific sound, just look at the prefix first, and then you can experiment from there in terms of the variety of different kinds of samples. So let's start with a loop because they're kind of fun. So one of the most widely used loops in Sonic Pi is this loop amen. Now samples are as simple as this. Right now, this loop will play once I hit run. So let's check it out. Now, again, that only lasted several seconds. However, that's going to be a building block to a lot of other different opportunities that you can have in Sonic Pi. Once we start learning about looping things over and over, you can take this short drum break and have it repeat. So you'll constantly have a drum beat going in the background. More about that in our next tutorial. But this is how you just go through experimenting with them. So they all have their own individual character. And there's a whole list of them. So again, in the lesson, students will have an opportunity to experiment, find their favorite samples, start getting their creativity going as to which ones they want to use when they make their original compositions. But that is how you trigger samples. So they work in the same way as play and sleep in that you can put them in between a note. So right here, if we wanted the play 60 to play first, and then we wanted it to wait a second and then play the sample and be choir, works the same way. If you wanted to have it play in unison with when you have the play 60 playing, you just remove the sleep. So that's one of the cool things about coding in Sonic Pi is that there's no real mysteries. Like if you want your composition to sound a certain way, you can represent that in code. So if it doesn't sound the way you want it, there's always a logical way to troubleshoot that and to see it written out in front of you to get that sound that you desire. So rate is the second thing that we're going to cover here. It's very closely related to samples. However, it applies to a lot of different parts of Sonic Pi. But for this lesson, we're just going to use our recently introduced knowledge of samples to also introduce rate. So let's queue up a sample here. This is really, again, a sort of thing that is easiest to hear with loops. Now, sample, again, kind of works like play. You can just queue up a sample and it'll play when you hit run. However, rate works the same way that amp and pan worked. So it's an inline command. Again, that's when you separate commands with a comma. So you'll see there's a bunch of them here that you can learn about on your own time. However, in terms of lesson number 3, we just cover rate. So we'll type in the word rate. Now, by default, every sample in SonicPy has a rate of 1. Now you can think about that as kind of like playback speed. So when you're watching videos or listening to an ebook, there's often an option to speed up or to slow down what you're listening to, like by 1.5 times or 2 times. That's sort of what rate does. So we can take this industrial loop sample, which I'll just have you listen to here. So it's like a 1 second long little drum sample here that you can loop. However, if we wanted to make that twice as long, we turn its rate to half, so 0.5, and then it will sound like this. Very different. Takes a little bit more time, has a darker feel. Almost sounds like an entirely different piece of audio in the first place. So to illustrate here, if we wanted it to go even faster, it'll be kind of hard to hear with this one, but so that's all it was. That was double speed. So there's some loops here that are a little longer. Let's see. We'll go with the loop again. This I'm in full is a good one, so we can do rate. Again, let's go down to 0.5. So, if you recall this drum beat from before, it's the same one, but now it has a very different sound. So, bring the rate back to 1 just to illustrate. Put the rate at 2 just to illustrate even further. So rate can alter the sound of anything on a line. It's most useful currently with the amount of knowledge that you and your students have to use it with samples, just to play around with it, find some cool different ways to make things sound interesting. But again, this is all that's essentially covered in lesson number 3. So at this point, as long as your students are familiar enough with play, sleep, synth, sample, rate, pan, and amp, you should be all set and ready to go for lesson number 4, which is when we get into live looping, one of my favorite lessons where the fun really, really begins there. So again, hope this was helpful. Always reach out to us at Macro Connect if you have any questions about your Code to Compose curriculum. Thanks.